Hey guys, the Fight Back podcast. Today I have a special guest, Eddie Liger Smith. Some of my audience probably isn't going to like this very much because he's a communist. I mean, I'm definitely not a communist, but we're not really having a debate. We're having a discussion. I'm sure I'm going to give some pushback on some issues because, like I said, there's a lot I don't like about communism. But I think overall, me and Eddie actually, we get along. We agree on a lot. So I think it should be, why not sit down and talk to people and see his perspective to see where, where he's coming from. So it's, yeah, I don't know where to start with communism. Well, you're part of the American Communist Party, correct?
Yep.
So when did you guys, will you guys just launch that?
Yeah, we just founded that. A lot of other groups, the Communist Party USA and another group called the Party of Communists USA, who we had various disagreements with, got a bunch of their members to split and join our party. So, yeah, basically just trying to compile all the most competent communists in America and get them together.
Yeah, it's you, Jackson Hinkle, who I actually like too. Haas. So you guys are kind of, it's interesting because communism is considered far left. You guys are kind of right leaning, so it's a little confusing.
Yeah, we on the social issues where I wouldn't say like we're straight up conservative, but like we're very focused on economics. Like we want to improve people's material conditions, not change how they think about bathrooms or, a lot of these other things.
Yeah, all the woke left bullshit.
Yeah, that's what we're against, that's like CPUSA and these other American communist parties are very focused on those. And for us, that's liberalism, which is what we're against.
Yeah, so it's not nothing you want involved with.
Right.
Because, you're the only right-wing communist I know. So the thing is, communism has so many, like, negative connotations, like supposedly all the bad things that are done and all the murders. What's your aspect on that? Like all the massacres that are supposedly done. Do you think those are exaggerated or do you think...
Yeah, I mean, revolutions are messy, like everybody. There were legitimately people who died in the October Revolution in Russia and the Chinese Revolution in 1949. Like, it involves a real uprising that can lead to people dying. That being said, the media, as I think we would agree, is propagandistic. The education system is propagandistic, and the people who own it are all anti-communist, Zionist, pro-imperialist. So they do, like, the Black Book of Communism is a great example. That's where the 100 million number comes from, and even one of the book's own authors has admitted that they exaggerated the totals to try and hit 100 million. So there were real deaths and even in some cases real atrocities, but it's been exaggerated at every stage by the corporate media.
Yeah.
And education system.
Why don't you walk through real quick what you think the pros of communism are?
Yeah, for me, communism is just like the real movement of history. So people say a lot of times that they want a mix of capitalism and communism. For me, that's just communism. Communism is we take the good parts of capitalism and we leave behind the bad parts. So there have been multiple economic systems before capitalism came into existence. Like the French Revolution was the overthrow of the kings, the queens, the monarchs, and replacing it with this new class that was called the bourgeoisie, who were the factory owners and the merchants, the people who built and traded commodities, who, because of the Industrial Revolution and the advance of technology, got all this power and wealth, which they then used to seize political power from the monarchs. So you saw a similar thing happen in the U.S. when there was slavery in the South. The plantation class in the South was eventually drawn into a class conflict with not only the slaves that they owned, who joined the Union Army once the Civil War kicked off, but the capitalists in the North. So they were the ones who led the effort. So this is what Karl Marx means when he says that all society is the history of class struggles. It's fights between different economic classes that allow the system to be transformed. So under capitalism, the two main classes are the working class and the capitalist class, and I believe that the working class should organize itself and have more political power than Wall Street shareholders and bankers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that, but the thing is, the problem with communism is, like, do you believe everyone should be able to make exactly the same, or should you be able to make your own businesses and still, do you like in a modified version, or do you think everyone should make exactly the same regardless of how hard they work?
No, and I would say that that's sort of the propaganda narrative of what communism is, that is pushed by what we call McCarthyism, the McCarthy era in the U.S. Really, if you look through the work of Marx, there's never anything where he calls for full equality or for people to make the same. What I really advocate for is a meritocracy.
Yeah.
A system where if you work hard, if you're innovative, you should advance. And in modern socialist countries like China and Nicaragua, they're stimulating small business. So they're giving these people resources when they have good ideas to start their small businesses, and it stimulates a lot of innovation. I think I'd like to see that in America because it seems like everything's monopolized right now.
So you don't believe everything, the government controls everything and hands it out. So you leave kind of a modified version, or at least what I believe was done originally in Russia and China. I know China's changed a lot now, but I think originally it was like the government controlled everything and people, pretty much everyone's poor. So, and that's why communism was looked at so negatively, because these people were, handed nothing. Could it potentially work the way you're saying? I don't know. I don't think it's ever really been tried that much.
Yeah, the thing about Russia and China, too, is these were feudal agrarian countries that were run by monarchs. So they were run by, there was the czars in Russia, and they had to be overthrown. And they didn't have any industry. They didn't have any factories. In China, they didn't have any steel. So that's when they made these backyard furnaces, because they had to teach their people who had been peasants for thousands of years how to use steel and build factories. And so the first 10 years of the Russian and Chinese revolutions were actually the fastest increase in life expectancy that's ever been seen in human history, because the government seized everything, but they weren't really seizing it from the people. They were seizing it from the monarchs and the landlords. And then they managed the economy in order to well, in the USSR, they were preparing for war with the Nazis. But in China, they just put everything towards industrial development. And then in the 70s in China is when they opened up to more private capital and said, the government doesn't need to centrally control everything. And that's really when their poverty alleviation exploded. So that's what I mean. You could call that a mix between communism and capitalism, but for me, that's just, what
So you think originally that's how it was, and you think it was kind of originally not done correctly?
I think they did what they had to do for the time, but what they did in 1917 USSR wouldn't be applicable in America because we already have industry.
Yeah, the country's already flourishing, but a lot of it is going towards the top. Because I agree there's a lot wrong with the country. It's just the people are completely screwing us over. I don't disagree with that, but I still feel like if I go and work hard, I should be able to be a millionaire. Yeah. Because a lot of people just aren't willing to work as hard as others. That's just the truth of the matter. I've ran some small businesses before, and some of the low wage workers are just really bad workers. They don't want to be there. As soon as you pay them, they're not going to show up the next day because they're probably buying drugs. And not that these are bad people necessarily, but it's they're not putting in the work versus someone you're paying a lot better. So a lot of times there is a reason for this stuff. So what do you do with the situation, the guys that don't want to work hard?
I just think they shouldn't get as much. I think they should be paid less, a real meritocracy. Because I think a lot of the people who, in the town I'm from right now, there's this guy running for office, and he's just a cokehead. Yeah. But his parents own oil companies. He's extremely wealthy, and I think someone like that should have to work a real job, I think a lot of the freeloaders are the people born into wealth, and and there's also we just released our party program with the ACP, and part of it would be cracking down on gangs and the drug trade so that there are less coercive things that turn people into bad workers, and degenerates, really.
Yeah, so you believe you can have some wealth, just not be born into massive wealth, and
Right, and China has millionaires. If you work hard and innovate, you should be rewarded for that 100%.
Yeah, well, I mean, you come from wrestling, which people don't know. You look at his ears; those are obviously wrestler ears. So it's however hard you work is what you get out of it. Yeah. So exactly, the idea. That's why I was surprised. The idea of a communist wrestler. So you're kind of a mix. So basically, the giant corporations are totally screwing us.
Right.
It gets complicated though, because a lot of times the government doesn't run things well. So how do you? I guess you have to. But China is being more efficient now. So I guess you have to totally redo our government. Because, you agree our government is completely incompetent, inefficient. You wouldn't want the current people running it trying to run things.
Right. This is one of the reasons I call myself a Marxist-Leninist. Because Lenin said that the capitalist state is so inefficient and so designed just to screw us over and exploit us that it needs to be completely revamped from the ground up. So, the American government as it functions now is intended to be inefficient. They want they want Medicare to be inefficient so then they can cut it and spend less money on social welfare. So you would need to completely revamp everything. It would need to be rebuilt, and that could look a variety of different ways. But
the medicine's a great one you mentioned, because the medicine in the U.S. is just absolutely terrible. But the problem is they go, we want free medicine from all. But the problem is they're overpaying so much, so we can't be free with the prices they're gouging. So, but they still want full prices for the drugs. It's just insane. I've been to a hospital, had to go to a hospital in Thailand for a staph infection, and a hospital in the U.S. for staph infection. In the U.S., it was $3,000, worse treatment. They didn't treat it properly. They didn't give me the right medicine. Thailand, it was $200. It was way cleaner. I was scared going to the Thailand hospital. I walked in there. It was amazing. The doctor was so knowledgeable, gave me drips. It was just right away. I knew exactly what it was. The U.S. doctors didn't know what the staph was. They were trying to give me extra tests. I don't know if it was just to make more money or because they didn't know what it was. Right. The doctor right away was just you have a staph infection, gave me the IV. So seeing how much better the hospital was in Thailand and cheaper versus America, that was like, wow, it shouldn't be this way.
Right, and our healthcare system's so messed up, and that was one of the things. Well, for one, I had a long-term illness when I was a kid. I got chronic Lyme disease.
Yeah.
So I had to deal with the healthcare system.
wow.
And it opened my eyes because they were really just sucking money out of my parents, you know.
No, it's just terrible. No, I agree with healthcare because it's terrible they're doing that. You know, sucking all the money, but it's their kid. They want you to help be healthy, and they're just draining their money from them.
Right.
And that's just wrong. And that's what healthcare has turned into. And I guess not just healthcare, a lot of things. You know, the
Right.
pharmaceutical companies, they're just, you know, forced the COVID vaccine on us.
Yeah.
That's why I think we agree on a lot. I just don't necessarily think that, you know, or know if communism seems difficult, but maybe some kind of hybrid. So I do agree we need changes. It's just figuring out how.
Right, and we just want, you know, we don't need everyone to call themselves a communist or join the ACP, but we want to build trust with people so that they'll, you know, at some point maybe be like, well, I trust the communists more than I trust my own government. And yeah.
I watched some clips with you before you came over. You said something really interesting. I thought that it's very important that you're respected in your community.
Yes.
I think that's crucial to anything. You have to have respect from those around you if you spread any ideas.
Yeah, that's why we've put so much effort into community relief. Like we handed out thousands of dollars of warm clothes. We raised $9,000 for Hurricane Helene relief, and all that money has been mobilized by people in our party. And it's like we run into all these people wearing our communism hats, and they're like, I don't like communism, I don't agree with it, but I appreciate that you're cleaning up the heroin needles in my park.
No, it's important you're doing good things. So at least people may be like, well, I don't like communism, but they're doing good things, then it'll make them listen.
Right.
So it's, you know, and that's why I brought you on. I could see like, oh, you're a genuine guy. We agree on a lot, you know, like Zion, we'll talk about that later. But, you know, this thing you see, and just a lot of things with people being better. You know, the average American, I think, is living paycheck to pay. 80% of the Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. You know, I'm not, so it's maybe me can be, but I grew up really poor, so I understand, you know, and I grew up sometimes trying to figure out how I'm going to eat. So I understand that it sucks, you know. Now I'm comfortable, and I do think I do believe, though, that we should be able to become comfortable, and we shouldn't all make the same, which is why I've been anti-communist, but I said you're kind of a hybrid version of it. I also don't know, does someone need multiple billions of dollars, you know?
Right.
And things, too, like things that are resources in America, sometimes they sell those out to to corporations. If it's American resource, why shouldn't the Americans get it?
That's why I think America, I was talking about this with my buddy who's like a libertarian. Like, I think America first is a great slogan.
Yeah.
Who could just, you know, and not everybody's going to know exactly what's going on in Ukraine and Palestine, but they know they'd rather have their resources invested in them.
Yeah, we don't want our resources, especially fighting foreign wars. I think most Americans, agree on that. Of course, sometimes they get suckered into it actually by their politicians.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of Democrats got suckered into the war, Ukrainian war, and a lot of Republicans got suckered into the Israeli war because their politicians are just pumping for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch with the Trump people because, like, as a communist, I loved watching Trump in 2016 just rail against
Oh,
Jeb
that was
Bush.
awesome. He was just so funny.
It was amazing and so anti-establishment. But yeah, there's a failure of the MAGA campaign, and that it's a little bit culty, and they'll just listen to whatever Trump says. And if he supports Israel, they support Israel too.
No, it's disappointing because I loved Trump in 2016. It wasn't really Paul in politics, but it was just so funny and it was pissing people off. So I'm like, you know what? I'm registered to vote just to piss people off. And I was living in San Francisco in the time, so I watched people crying all over the streets. It was hilarious. So
It's San Francisco's like crazy woke, isn't it?
Yeah, it's completely falling apart. Like I said, I can get along with different people. So even though I've always been kind of conservative leaning, I've always still been get along with these people, other than the crazy like woke fake people. But I'm just telling them, just like shut up, get out of here.
Right.
Like during BLM, it was like a little retarded. They were just over the top, like with the black people. And I was like, you guys are just so annoying. Like my black friends would be like telling me all the embarrassing stuff they're getting texts, like white people calling to like apologize for microaggressions and stuff. They're like, oh my God, this is like so awkward. They want to just be treated normal, you know?
Right, yeah, like normal people. And that's the thing, a lot of the wokes are like the most racist people. Like you got to pander to black people and treat them different. Like,
right,
no,
like, oh, you can't get an ID, you can't do this.
You can't get an ID, that's the most racist thing. Like they really tell us that black people can't get IDs.
No, that's why people tell me that all the time in San Francisco, and I'd be like, so if you invite one of your black friends out, do you ask them if they have an ID?
Right.
It's so embarrassing and demeaning.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and that's really what we're trying to separate ourselves from, because like, and the CIA has spent a lot of money pumping those kind of leftists, you know, and pushing them in order to really prevent any kind of real anti-establishment movement from growing.
Yeah, the CIA goes after a lot of movements. Anytime any movement's real, the CIA with the PIA and feds will try to infiltrate it and destroy it. And the stuff they do in other countries, they do it here too. People are like, oh, they're messing with elections overseas and doing this and that. And it's like, yeah, they're doing it here too.
Yeah, and they're not supposed to do anything domestically, but they do. And then like there's Mossad too, who I feel like does a lot of the CIA's dirty work here in the U.S.
Yeah, they work hand in hand. We'll get that to the end because I think that'll get probably cut off the YouTube part.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No. We can say a little bit about it, but we can go deep into that at the end. So, so I would say the other things with communism. Typically, communism has no free speech. What's your thoughts on that?
I think free speech is a uniquely American value. That, because this is the other thing about communism is, like I said, communism takes a unique national form in every country. So American communism would look much different than Chinese communism, where they don't have a ton. I mean, there's freedom of debate to a degree, but they're not going to allow like U.S. corporate media outlets in China. They just see it as propaganda and they ban it, which to an extent I understand why, especially when they're defending from the U.S. trying to overthrow their government. But I think in the U.S., like, we should maintain free speech as a principle.
Okay, so you would be allowing, this, like the social media, you still could have voices and newspapers and all that.
Yeah, and I really like I'm not a fan of Elon 100%, but like what he's done with X, I think is good. If you have real free speech and if you're really not censoring certain people or boosting other kinds of people, like, I don't know what could be wrong with that.
He's been great for that, He's not perfect, because he still does ban people, but I was like on my last warning before he bought it, so.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so as I was about to get kicked off, it's nice to be able to have a free a voice.
Yeah.
I've been demonetized for criticizing Israel, but
right.
At least I still can speak on there.
Right, yeah. I had 7 TikTok accounts banned now, including one with 375,000 followers, one with 200,000. That I would be making much more money now.
It's crazy because they say that's a Chinese company. The reason they're making them sell because they're criticizing Israel, but they're still censoring that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I haven't heard talk about the sell. Maybe they made some kind of deal where they'll keep this topic off.
Yeah. I think they made a backdoor deal with the Zionist groups who were pressuring
who were going to buy
TikTok
it.
ban, or
it. Yeah, that was eye opening. Where as soon as the Zionists called for it, the ADL, a couple organizations ago, we need to get this anti-Semitism off TikTok. Boom, the Congress met right away, forced the sell. Yep. Congress they also we had emergency meetings to fund Ukraine and Israel. People wanted border support too. They didn't add that. Instead, they go, oh, we'll vote them all separately. And they didn't even vote the border. They just voted Israel and Ukraine. That's when I'm like, our government hates us. So it's like, I do agree we need a different government. I still don't agree it's communism, but I do agree we need changes, which is why these, talks could be good. We might see some good ideas and realize we're not that far off, especially because I think you're kind of like your version of communism is not how most people think of communism.
Right. Which I would argue I have the real version of communism, and they have the CIA funded.
Yeah, I haven't read the old communism, so I can't really comment on that. I just know it's very negatively portrayed in the U.S., and I think some of it's deserved because I know a lot of people that come from these communist countries don't speak high of it. I know, again, it's the people that are fleeing a lot of times, but as a whole, a lot of people that came from Russia, places speak very negatively of communism.
Right, and part of that social pressure, and like in Cuba, a lot of the people who went to Miami were the plantation owners who got their plantation seized by the peasants, and so they have their own interest in,
Yeah, no, that's definitely true.
And in Russia, actually, 75% of people now say they prefer the Soviet economic model because things got so bad after the collapse because their whole economy was sold off to Western shareholders. And before, things weren't perfect, absolutely not perfect, especially in the 80s and early 90s of the USSR. But like people had free daycare. The average cost of rent was 2 or 3% of your income versus under capitalism it's like 20-some%. Average cost of utilities was 1 to 2% of their income, and all of a sudden, after the collapse, these people were thrown into this rigid, individualistic capitalist system where if you can't afford daycare, well, you're shit out of luck, and they didn't know how to cope.
No, that's tough. I don't know how a single mother is supposed to pay for daycare.
Right.
Daycare is, especially something semi-decent. You don't want to send your kid to some crappy daycare. It's like almost the wages of what they're making, so it's impossible. Right. So I do understand, people consider, I guess I'm kind of right-leaning, but I'm not stuck on any, I'm willing to listen to other perspectives if they make sense. People get too caught up in, I'm right or I'm left. It's like, okay, we have a lot of problems in our country and we do need to work to fix them. It isn't really, I get it, you have your kids and stuff, but you should be able to work. I mean, there's no reason why we can't have free daycare. That's good too. Not this crap. Our schools are terrible too. Our schools are falling apart. It's like all of our money, it's like a big Ponzi scheme in the U.S. It's all going overseas to legal immigrants. It's like, so, there is a lot of fixing we need to do.
Absolutely. And on the border issue, too, we want to secure the border. I mean, leftists are calling for open borders. That's not.
That was actually the next question I was going to ask you. I was very curious your opinion on the borders. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to separate kids from their families or do things that are inhumane. It needs to be safe. But, you got to have a secure border. there are people calling for open borders. Like, this is absurd. And the top places where refugees are fleeing are Syria, Venezuela, Ukraine. All places where
we're
the US
destroying.
is heavily involved. Yes.
No, I don't want refugees coming in, but we are destroying the places too.
Right.
Like it's like we're destroying the countries and people are coming in. I still don't think we should take them, but it is partially our fault.
Right, and if we would, there would be way less people fleeing if we would just, stop doing that. But yeah, you need a secure border. It needs to. You have to have an idea of who's in your country.
Especially if you're giving, free healthcare, free childcare.
Especially
you can't do those things without it. And that's what Bernie Sanders was always hardcore borders. Then Trump came along and the left went against borders. So Bernie followed along. It was so pathetic and sad to see.
Sad. I worked for him in 2020 and that taught me so much.
Yeah, and he didn't even, when they stole the election from him, he just took it.
Like,
that was just so embarrassing.
I can't even explain how angry the people on the campaign were.
I could imagine.
I mean, there were people on the campaign who were just like Democratic staffers trying to climb the ladder, but
no, people were pretty mad on the. So his followers actually saw that. They didn't just make excuses for it.
Yeah.
They're more aware than Trump supporters then.
Yeah, right. There were a lot of people like me and Jackson who were just like, we don't agree with Bernie on the woke stuff, but he's gonna fight for healthcare, so whatever. And he's talking about ending the war, so whatever, we'll work for him. And then we saw the failures of the campaign, how he was cucked by the Democrats, and
didn't even call it out. So embarrassing. I was never a Bernie supporter, but I respected him. After that, I'm like, I can't respect this guy.
No, I've lost all respect.
He just flipped on the borders, other stuff too. I can't remember what. He's flipped on a bunch of things now. It's like he had, for so many years, he held his integrity, then he just lost it. Like why are you going to go at your deathbed if you're just where you die and just become a coward sellout? So pathetic.
At the end of his life. And if you read his biography, he was running as an independent in Vermont. He was openly like, I'm a socialist, but Vermont was a red state. And they voted for a guy who was a socialist year after year because he would just go to the people and say, what do you want? They'd tell him so much of politics is focused on bathrooms and all these weird, stupid distractions.
Fighting over stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Which they are real issues, but they're not the main issues. The main issues is the economics, so I don't disagree with that.
Right. So he would just say, like, what do you want? People would tell him, we want these roads fixed. There's potholes on this road. And he would get it done. So they kept voting for a socialist year after year, even though these people were Republicans. And then he got into the national elections, and that's when the Democrats got their hooks in him, and he became a bitch.
Yeah, you mentioned potholes. That's a good thing. I was living in California with a 13% state tax plus our federal tax, and there's like the roads are a mess. Then they charge you tolls on top of it to pay for the roads. So you're paying, $10 across a bridge, another $3 across this road. It's like, where's our money going?
Where's it going?
It just doesn't make any sense.
It's robbery.
No, they're just robbing us blind,
Right.
But okay, under communism, so the massive corporations you guys probably wouldn't allow. The government runs those, or is it a mix? Or
yeah, probably like would want to nationalize a lot of them, like make them publicly owned, and then say rather than the surplus going to Wall Street, it gets invested in the workers, expanding production, and then social welfare.
So what do you do with, like, say, the guy who founded this business? He did really well. You just give them a large payout and let him retire a nice life, or he can start another business if he wants, or
pretty well, yeah. But I mean,
because sometimes these guys are better at running their company, so it gets a little tricky.
Realistically, you would need to work with them because they know how to run their company. So you would need to, and this is there's no just overnight switch to communism. It's a transition. And like Lenin openly said, we're going to have to learn to work with the capitalists. We'll just have to say, you're not allowed to pay your workers dirt anymore. Give them no safety and no benefits. You got to give them those things. But you need to work with these people who understand how their company.
Some people are good at business. They're good at making these things. So you can't deny that. You get rid of certain people, it's not going to operate. Like, he might not like Elon Musk, but he knows how to run companies, Yeah,
I was at
he makes good cars. He does good with Twitter. He's like, I don't know much about the Star, company he does, but he obviously knows business.
Right. I've been staying at the Trump Hotel this week, and I told that to my friend. I'm like, man, the guy knows how to run a hotel.
Right? Trump hotels are awesome. Yeah, I'll stay at Trump Hotel sometimes.
Yeah, it was sweet. I liked how there wasn't the casino in the basement and all the craziness. It was kind of like an escape from Vegas, but yeah.
But no, it's a cool little spot. So you would still allow people to get fairly rich though under your communism. Yeah. So it's kind of, I guess similar to like China, because there's still a lot of rich people in China, but you just don't want anyone super poor.
Right. No poverty. You eliminate poverty, but let people get it. We want everyone to be rich. Deng Xiaoping, the guy who opened up China to foreign capital in the 70s and allowed more U.S. companies in, he said, to be rich is glorious. And he said that was a real change for communist ideology. Like, we're not going to fetishize poverty anymore.
No, I don't. No one should have to be poor,
Right.
But again, people do work harder than others. So there has to be some kind of human nature is to kind of climb to the top. You know that from wrestling. So there has to be some kind of reward benefit. Otherwise, people aren't gonna work on things.
Yeah, it needs to be a meritocracy for sure. And right now, the meritocracy is like you have a lot of doctors who go into being doctors just to make money, you know. And I wish there was more of a focus on going into these jobs for the good of your community.
To heal people, to get people healthy.
Right.
That's what they should be a doctor for, but you're right. It's not. It's about making money.
Yeah.
I mean, they tried pushing, I think, like 4 surgeries on me. I didn't get any of them. You know, my knee, like 3 all doctors said, oh, your knee definitely needs a surgery. Didn't get it. Because it was like 9-month recovery. I'm like, I think I could just rehab it for 3 months myself. Did that and
feels fine now.
yeah, I mean, it was pretty messed up. I had to actually take some time off and rehab it because I'm stubborn, kept trying to train on it and kept repopping. And I was gonna get the surgery, and I'm like, you know what, 9-month recovery. I'm gonna try rehabbing it for a few months without training. Did that, and it was fine.
Yeah, with childbirth too. 30% of births are C-sections now. It's not even healthy.
No, they push it on the. They know what they're doing too. They give them a lot of times they'll induce the birth, and then it causes the baby's heart rate to speed up. They know this, but then they start. Oh, the baby's heart rate's speeding up. The parents are going to panic because they don't want to lose their baby, and then they suggest a C-section. They know what they're doing. They move them along. It's terrible what they're doing. Yeah, there are cases where they're needed, but it's rare.
Right.
It should be like 2% maybe or 1%.
Right.
And now it's like 33%. It's just criminal. So I agree with all this corruption. That's why these conversations are interesting because we have to figure out to fix it. One problem I see is human nature. People, you know, they want to go to the top. So how do you stop the government from doing that?
Yeah, you need like in China. I like Deng Xiaoping and that guy in the 70s who said to be rich is glorious, but like corruption became a huge problem after that. But they call the 90s the wild 90s in China because a lot of people in the party were extremely corrupt. And that's actually why Xi Jinping is so popular in China because he launched these anti-corruption efforts and basically tried and jailed or fired anybody who was corrupt. So it needs, like, you need discipline, and the society needs to hold itself accountable. And it can very easily devolve. Like the Soviet Union got very corrupt.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's part of my problem. I think it could work with like a strong semi-dictator type leader, and that's, you know, hang the traitors. I think it can work like that, but it's like it could easily fall apart to a guy completely taking everything, leaving his people with nothing. That's where it gets complicated.
I just don't think there could be any system more corrupt than what we have in the U.S. I think
it's
anything
pretty
would
bad
be
right
better
now, man.
than
It's
this.
pretty bad right now. It's just the people, they do not serve us. I think
No.
everyone's starting to see it. They're literally basically say "fuck you" to us. You know, here, money all goes to Ukraine instead. You know, the schools are terrible. You can't even send your kid to a public school. You know, a lot of people can't afford a private school, but it's like private schools are expensive. But like if you have the money, you like have to send your kid because the public educations are just so terrible here. It shouldn't be that way when you're paying that money that you can't. But you also got to send your kid to private school and you're already paying the taxes for the public school. Makes no sense.
Yeah, no, my dad and sister are public school teachers, and they're like, I mean, my sister's just getting into it, but my dad's seen it change over the last few years.
It's gotten really bad, right? It's
So
just
bad.
all about like test taking and not like actually teaching your kids.
Right, memorization.
Yeah, you don't learn anything from test taking. It's like you actually have to have a relationship with the kids to be respected and like teach them life lessons. And now it's just about, take this standardized test.
Right, you got to teach them how to think critically, which is the opposite of what we do. It's memorize this information, get tested on it, forget it. You know?
How to think, that's crucial, you know. And like as a parent, that's what I tell people. Like if you have kids, teach them how to think too. You know, let them even challenge you, like obviously in a respectful manner, but teach them like don't just automatically believe whatever you would say. You know, like my daughter, I would always let her like challenge me, like obviously not in a disrespectful way, but we could debate things. And started getting really, really good, coming up with good points. And a few times I would have to be like, "Damn, I think you might be right." It can be hard to admit for a parent, but I think it's so crucial to teach your kid how to think and like have these. Don't just trust what you're told. Think why. What are the reasons? And schools, like they're even saying now. Somewhere recently I saw it was saying, "Don't do your own research. Just trust what they tell you." Or in COVID, they're really pushing that. Don't do your own research.
They were mocking people like for doing their own research. Like,
exactly.
We're mocking people for reading now, for looking into stuff.
No, and that was right when I retired from fighting, so I had a ton of free time, so I did deep research into it, and to me, I was very aware of what was going on, and everyone's going, "You're not a doctor, you don't know what you're talking about," and it's like, you don't need to be a doctor to read through studies and graphs. All this stuff was publicly available.
Yeah.
Even before they closed down America, we saw in Italy, it was like people who were dying had 5 comorbidities. I think they were like 81 or 83. That's why I got really, really mad at Trump for closing down the country. And everyone's like, well, he didn't know. And it's like, well, if I knew, why shouldn't Trump have known?
Right.
I think it's not bad to expect the president to be as smart as me. I don't think I'm any genius. And it did take some time, but I went and carefully went through all the data. So by the time they closed down the country, I was just like, what?
Right.
This is not going to affect healthy people like me.
Right.
And I was 100% right. I mean, there was no people like us dying. People that did die because they're putting on ventilators, remdesivir. It was this drug they were pushing because it was really expensive because there was no money to be made in hydrochloroquine and ivermectin.
Right.
So they didn't push that. And I don't know much about that. I don't know if that was effective or wasn't, but a lot of people seem to think it was, but there was no money in it.
I know a lot of people, they were in the global south, like countries like in Africa and Latin America, and they took ivermectin because the vaccine was being blocked.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they swear by it. But
I know a few people that took it and swear by it too. So it probably was effective. Thing is, if they just said that worked, they wouldn't have been able to push the vaccine on us.
Right.
They wouldn't have done the emergency, and they tried. I was in California, San Francisco. I wasn't allowed to go into restaurants without it. I wasn't allowed to go into bars. They treated me like I was some kind of, so I was just like, fuck you people.
Yeah, that was one
moved out here.
That was one nice thing about Iowa was like we had a right-wing government, and like I live right on the border, and Illinois was locked down, and Iowa not so much. Wisconsin was locked down too. I was studying epidemiology at the time, and same as you, I saw the writing on the wall. And then I got suspended from my job as a wrestling coach, and this super
why did they suspend you for?
Because I didn't have the second vax, I only had the first one. So they made me I got super sick, and this woke lady gave me this big lecture about how I could have killed my wrestlers. They made us wrestle with masks on.
Oh my God.
So we're sweating all over each other wearing masks.
That's just disgusting.
That's when I started to be like, okay, what is
I was running jiu-jitsu illegally in San Francisco, but everyone was scared to come in. And so people suggested masks. I'm like, no, just don't come in. We're not wearing masks. And then people are like, well, maybe have one partner. It's like, if you just come in, if you want, you can go on the side with a partner. But I'm switching partners. I'm running class completely normal, and it's illegal, but if San Francisco, not people are even coming in. Guys be like, oh, my wife won't let me. And then they're like wanting to have a little social distance. Guys are wanting to come in like, oh, we come at a different time. I was just like, oh, you guys are just so lame.
I know people got divorced over it because their wives bought into it and they were more skeptical. And it's sad.
It really showed the human nature. People are just sheep and they'll follow along. It's stuff that you thought was like, you see in history books and stuff. And you're like, wow, humans will still just follow what they're told without any critical thinking, without without doing their own research. Well, the doctor said, the CDC said, it's crazy. And the CDC has their best interest.
Right.
And which the one that Fauci runs, the
NIH.
Yeah, those guys have our best health. Fauci was just absolute dirtbag. He's the one that had, during the AIDS epidemic, he pushed AZT, which was poisoning the gay people and killing them. I had a gay cousin at the time. He was totally fine for years with it. He ignored it, but finally he got tested. And he's like, oh, I got it. They put him on AZT instantly. He got sick, started falling apart, dying. Later, I read the RFK's book, and it tracked how as soon as they stopped giving that AZT or really small amounts, they stopped having a bunch of gay people. You notice they're not dying from AIDS anymore. When I was a kid, they were dying like crazies because they were poisoning with AZT. And Fauci was this experiment. So it was the drugs that was killing him, not the disease.
That's crazy. I've been meaning to read RFK's book.
It's really good. I mean, RFK has been an absolute disappointment on it, but overall, he's great on. You definitely should read that book. It's really good.
I don't get why he's friends with Rabbi Shmuley, that whack job. Because RFK seems so rational, and then he's hanging out with this insane person. I like him,
but he's just so off of that. Shmuley must be some kind of high-level mafia because everyone goes and bows to him. Michael Jackson, all these politicians are always going and kissing his ass. So he must have some deep, deep connections. Like the mafia those people have is pretty serious. I think Michael Jackson said he was scared he was going to kill him. The Michael Jackson rabbit hole is interesting. I was completely convinced he was a pedophile, disgusting. But then it's like you start looking at the things, and it's like a lot of kids are like, absolutely not. The people who sued him were all for money.
The parents of the kids.
It was like a big money grab. So it's.
Do you see the Candace Owens video on that? That was how I started going.
I didn't watch that. I kind of randomly went down that rabbit hole because someone was like, oh, I don't think he's guilty. I'm like, of course he's guilty. And I started going down, and I'm like, wow, they make you out to be the worst possible thing.
Yes, yeah, that's the go-to smear. I don't know if you've heard of Scott Ritter.
I've heard of him, but haven't watched a lot of stuff. I hear he's great, but you start watching, I haven't watched much of his stuff.
Yeah, they smeared him as a pedophile or whatever just for being
He's anti-Zionist too, yeah.
Yep.
Well, we can talk a little about that. We can just always cut it too, because I know you're like super. Let's go to communism a little more before we switch over. Actually, so what about the Second Amendment? Would you keep that?
Yeah, Marx actually has a quote that says any attempt to disarm the workers should be disrupted by force if necessary. So real communists have always been very pro-gun.
No,
Because
that's
how else are
good.
you going
Yeah,
to stop the government here?
no, because you are supposed to stop the government tyranny. That's why it's here for America.
Yeah.
It's not. It's to fight the government, not just random people. That's the whole point of it. A lot of people don't realize that. That's why we need ARs and all this. And people are like, oh, you can't win that way. It's like you can though, because it's not It's not easy for them. Yeah, they have drones, tanks, but it's not that easy. When people have guns, they can creep up.
Guerrilla war, and many military members would probably join. Any kind of uprising against the government, and that would cause problems for them logistically. It's very possible to have a guerrilla war that overthrows the government. Not that I'm advocating for that.
No, it's happened multiple times. We lost to Vietnam. We lost to Afghanistan in the hills. Hopefully in Palestine, Israel will lose.
Yep.
It shows that you can win these guerrilla warfares over long periods of time, because it's hard if resistance just keeps fighting.
Right. Palestine's a perfect example. How many bombs have they dropped on the tiny little Gaza Strip?
I think more than like World War II. I think I read somewhere or something, or more than they dropped on England in World War II at least. It's just disgusting.
Right. This tiny little strip of land. But the people keep fighting. They keep killing leaders. And
and they tried making that Sinwar into a coward, and then they released the footage, and it's like, you're calling this guy a coward. He's on the front lines fighting, covered in dust, his arms basically blown off, has a tourniquet, he's still throwing sticks at the drones when they come to kill him. This guy fights to his last breath. It's fine to not like what he does, but to call him a coward, it just shows you how out of touch they are.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was inspiring for me. I actually ended up almost getting banned on TikTok again because I had a few drinks and started defending Sinwar on TikTok. But
it just shows you how they miscalculated. To them, they're like, haha, we're going to show this guy dying, because they don't understand, they're such cowards over their drones. We're going to show a guy dying, but it's like, this guy's you can definitely say he's done some bad things, but ultimately he's defending his land. It's like, he has nowhere to go. They probably killed, all of his friends, family. What's he going to do? So, he's in his 60s, but they were telling us the whole time that he was hiding in a tunnel like a rat. He's a coward, hiding in hospitals. He was right in the front line, engaging with tanks, with his soldiers. He's the leader of Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu is hiding in a bunker.
Yeah.
Like a coward.
Exactly.
And they're telling us this guy's the coward. It's fine to say you don't like what he does, but to say he's a coward, no.
Hiding behind his U.S.-backed weapons. And Sinwar spent 19 years in Israeli prisons being tortured. And that's the thing. There's thousands of Palestinians in Israeli prisons being tortured. And then they're talking about, we need to bomb them to get the hostages back. Like, you have Palestinian hostages.
Yeah, and they've been offering the hostages back this whole time.
Right.
Yeah, and they're also big on rape. A lot of the guys probably don't admit they're rape, but they try to rape them all to dehumanize them and make them, humiliate them. I think it happens a lot more than the guys want to admit, but they're infatuated with raping everyone. There's just disgusting people. Yeah. But none of the Palestinian hostages were raped or abused. That was a spy that wrote that story. It was a Mossad spy. It just came out. The mass rapes, and before he beheaded babies, all the prisoners would come out and be like, "Oh, we were treated great," because he was very big on treat the prisoners good. Yeah. And kidnapping people is still terrible, so I'm not going to defend that. Right. But the plan was like a hostage swap.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was tactical, and they were treated better, like you said, than there's so much documented torture in Israel. Since it's out of control.
Oh, even on Wikipedia, we'll say it. People can Google Wikipedia Israel torture, and it doesn't even deny it. It's proven, known thing. They have massive torture camps, and it's just we turn a blind eye to it.
Yep.
They're the only supposed civilized country in the world that's still torturing. And America did it at one point, but it's a stain on us where it was embarrassing. The guys were in jail. We don't look at that proudly, and yet Israel still does it, and we give them money.
Right.
And they were on camera gang raping some guy.
Yeah, and then protesting their right to do it afterwards.
Oh, then, we had riots to get the guys out of jail. Then the guys going on TV, a TV star. It's just a sick nation.
It is. It's a truly sick society, and that's why I think that it needs to cease to exist eventually as a state. You at least can't have an ethno state. You can't say Arabs are banned here. We get this land. It's all ours, and they're not allowed in. That's not civilization.
No. Plus, they want to keep taking lands. The thing too. I don't know if you know Greater. Probably aware of that. And then it's not like a conspiracy. It's like they wear it on their uniforms, and Netanyahu holds pictures of it. They want to take pieces of. Everyone's always, well, why don't the other Arab nations take the refugees? It's because they plan on taking their land next.
Yes.
And it's terrible. The Palestinians are just used as pawns. I feel so terrible for them. It's like
Gaza's just a punching bag. Every time Hezbollah does something, they just bomb Gaza, these kids, and it's. Yeah, to the justification for armed resistance, the only time Israel's ever given land back was when they took the Sinai Desert from Egypt. And then Egypt, and that was in 1967, and then 1970 or 1973, Egypt and Syria launched the surprise attack where they were able to kill like 200 some IDF members, and it was the most casualties Israel had ever taken. And then Egypt was able to negotiate to get the desert back. So the only language that Israel understands is force. You know?
Well, the Sinwar guy, he was in 2018 and 19. They did they wanted to do a peaceful protest to try a border protest. So they're like, oh, we're going to march on the border to see if this works. This is the same guy. He's like, let's try something different. They responded by killing 223, 46 children, shooting like 10,000. And like, I think maybe 1,000 of them they shot in the dicks, like intentionally to take their manhoods away, like laughing about it. So that's how they respond to peaceful protests.
Exactly. All they did was walk up to the walls.
Yeah. So what would any man do in America? Are you going to sit there and take it? Or are you going to, so they call them terrorists. Like, who's the terrorists?
Exactly. Like, I don't ideologically agree with Hamas.
No.
Hamas aren't communists. They're, based in Muslim, their religion. But, like, if the same thing was happening in America, there'd be Christian militias or whatever.
I would hope so. Yeah, I would hope so. Because there better be militias. If they're not let people just come and take our land and kill us and rape us and torture us. And
Right. Yeah, it's hard for Americans to put themselves in other people's shoes. But I feel like the world is waking up to the Israel thing.
They're definitely becoming unpopular. It's hard because our politicians are all bought by them. And they push for him so heavily, And Trump, a lot of people, whatever Trump says, they just repeat. So it's so disappointing that Trump's doesn't speak truth in that.
Yeah, I had a coach who I was really getting through to him on Zionism, and then as soon as Trump came pro-Israel, it just went.
Yeah, because Trump was in the middle, and once he went hard, that was terrible. But I think the world's seeing it, and overall, people are turning on him. And
yeah, that's why this podcast is so awesome too, because you're bringing so many people together who are different ideologies, willing to talk to communists or whatever about it. Yeah,
and like I said, I'm willing to talk to anyone. It just happens to be people keep being. I haven't had any pros in this yet. I guess I should at some point, but man, it's almost hard to talk to them. It's like, how are you gonna when someone's like pro killing children? I need to do it at some point, but that's a tough conversation to have.
It is, and you're probably not gonna learn anything. They're just gonna repeat
gaslight and talking point. Yeah. No, because that's when I first went to. When I started paying attention, they were just speaking talking point after talking point to me, and it just wasn't quite adding up. So I was trying to go down to the West Bank. I had a friend on there. I was trying to go to the West Bank, and they just weren't letting me. And that's when I started going home and started doing a lot of research. And they're great with their talking points. They're amazing. This is always our homeland. We were invaded all the time. Why can't we have our own nation? It's like they don't realize they can. They just started massacring people, taking more and more land.
One of my favorite books is Norm Finkelstein's The Holocaust Industry, because his parents were survivors, but he says in the 1950s most Americans didn't know this happened. They didn't know it was a thing. Then in the 60s, Israel realized we can use the Holocaust to get people to support Zionism, and they started building all these Holocaust museums, pushing it in schools. You have all these celebrity Holocaust survivors emerge, and they tie it to Israel, and it's a good talking point. Yeah, we were genocided, so we should be allowed to genocide.
Hollywood, they made thousands of movies about it. Who happens to be ran by people? No, it's brilliant. It's you look at the old books by all the books after the war. They don't mention the
right.
It wasn't till like I said, 10, 20 years later, the whole kind of thing.
Right.
I'm not supposed to do this, but I think I'm gonna have a debate on here. The problem is I'm having a hard time finding someone that'll bait. I have a denier, but I'm having a hard time someone that'll argue that it happened. I've had 3 people pull out so far. Once I give them the name of the guy they're supposed to debate, they do a little research, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to pull out of this. And I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion. I just think the idea that you're not allowed to talk about that pisses me off.
Yes.
It's like you can go to jail in 19 countries for talking about it. That's why I think, okay, let's have a debate and see.
Right. And Finkelstein, the guy who wrote that industry book, it would be great if you could get him to do that debate, I think. But he got so canceled for that book, and he's not a Holocaust.
Yeah,
he says that it happened repeatedly in the book, but he says here's how they exaggerated it and used it to get people to support it.
Well, I think a perfect example at the beginning of the conversation, you think it was exaggerated, the deaths in communism. I don't know if that's true or not, but you should be allowed to say that and question it. But you can't question these deaths, even on YouTube or anywhere, I think even in Twitter you can get pulled down for it.
Right.
It's it's the one thing that you can't question. It just shows because whether it happened that way. Not, it was still turned into an industry and a talking point and a power thing, and they use that to we can do this because the
right, but you're not allowed to say King Leopold of Belgium in 1908 killed 10 million people, Congolese people, and cut off their hands.
Was it 10 million? Yeah, 10 million. Yeah, 10, 15 million. Yeah, 10 million is right. I think you're right. Yeah, insane. Just absolutely brutal torture. Hardly even knows who he is. One of the most evil people ever.
Right. It was a really in the Congo.
Oh
We
yeah,
don't know
but
about it.
They don't teach him. Yeah.
Nothing politically useful about it.
No, exactly. I'm sure Hitler wasn't a good dude, but they made him the face of evil, so Israel use that to their advantage.
Right, and I would argue that they tried to tie communist leaders to him too. Like there's a book called Origins of Totalitarianism that says, Hitler and Stalin were the same, and because Hitler was already viewed as the boogeyman, you're able to, and that's what they do every time they want to invade someone. Saddam Hussein's Hitler, Sinwar is Hitler. It's just everybody's Hitler.
They use it as an excuse for like, oh, we killed these kids in the house, but they had Mein Kampf in their room. It's like, what? Yeah. So they read Mein Kampf so I could kill their children.
Right.
I think if you had my home destroyed too, I'd be.
They just planted that.
Yeah, probably planted. But even if they did, is that a reason to kill someone? They read a book with mean words.
Right. But it's like, why shouldn't you read? Just because you read a book doesn't mean you got to agree with the guy. You can understand him better and understand why you hate him. Then, if you
I like reading like all points.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think? If this goes to both capitalism and communism, so I guess it doesn't make a difference. But if you look at a lot of the people controlling capitalism, you look at BlackRock, Vanguard, same people run them. It's I think 18 of the top hedge fund managers, all the top donors of the Democratic Party, all Trump's top donors. You get most people that own most of the social media. They own almost all of our media. They own Hollywood, all the same group. Then you look at communism, created by the group, about 50% of the Bolsheviks, I believe were. I tried looking it up. It's hard to get exact numbers. It looked like about 50%. Putin said like 85% of the first Soviet government was.
I don't know about that one. I have friends who did a big deep dive into that, and I don't know if it was as high as 50, but I know in China there were less, and they were actually funding the PFLP, the Palestinian Liberation Group, and they condemned it as an outpost of Western imperialism, and Stalin was against it as well, and he fought against them within the Soviet Party.
Yeah.
Because at the time there were some people
early on, I think they had anti-Semitism was death penalty, but later he purged most of the Jewish people. So it's definitely later it wasn't, but early on I think it was mostly not mostly, but like very, very high percentage. They didn't. It wouldn't mean because it's the same thing in capitalism. It doesn't mean one's necessarily wrong, but it's like the same people we see manipulating both.
Yeah, I would argue that there are historical reasons why there are so many people in positions of power, because they were given these jobs as moneylenders because the Muslim and Christian people didn't want to do it, and were oppressed and treated like crap, so they got pushed into these money lending and banking jobs, which then now banks run everything.
You have the banks
so they
control
were able,
thing.
and people tend to keep money in the family just culturally. They pass it down to their kids. But I would argue that it's the ownership that gives them the power, not the fact that they're just like a Bill Gates.
Oh, I agree with I definitely agree with that. No, I agree. It's probably comes from the banking, but then you look, it's still they're controlling a lot of things. You look at like BlackRock, that's not a good company. I think we'd agree on that, right? And Vanguard, they're manipulating all of our companies, and it's like this by no means means people are bad, but it seems like a lot of the ones from the bankers don't seem like they're doing the best things.
I think Zionism has really not completely ruined the Jewish community, but it's destroyed it in a lot of ways, because it tells young Jewish kids that you have to support this genocidal ethno state, this apartheid state that's murdering children, otherwise you're a bad Jew. And nothing creates more anti-Semitism than Israel, because you see this country that wraps itself in the Star of David and claims to represent people, and then bombs children and pushes propaganda to convince the community to support them. So it's had a terrible effect on the community themselves. But as for like Jews running communism, I mean, Stalin was Slavic.
Yeah, and he wasn't. I know he wasn't
either. And
he
Marx
had some I know Mao had some bankers
Jewish,
that backed him, but again, the bankers, I guess, back all the wars, so you can't necessarily say that means anything.
Right. Hitler had a slush fund too that a lot of big bankers, including bankers, were funneling.
Pretty wild, right? And he early on he worked with his it wasn't his first choice, but he worked with his to bring them over to. A lot of people don't know that he worked hand in hand with it was before the World War. What was it called? It was something. Damn, I can't think of the name of it. The Havara or something. It shows, but I mean, you could look it up. It shows that he worked with the Zionists for multiple years to bring them to Israel.
It was
the Zionists were trying to get them out because they couldn't get people. They're trying to get everyone there to take the land. The bankers were funding it, but people weren't coming there like they thought. So they're like, "Oh, we can have Hitler push them out to it here."
Yeah, it wasn't until like 1941 that he stopped supporting, or that the Nazis stopped exporting expulsion. Like that Hitler would have loved Israel, just send all the Jews he didn't want in Germany there.
I don't think he loved it because he liked the Middle East people, but he wanted them out of there. So he's just like, all right. So he struck a deal with them.
Right.
So like if they went there, they could like bring some of their money or something like that. Otherwise, I think they were confiscating their goods.
Right. It would have been extremely politically useful for what he wanted.
Yeah, and it was useful for them. They loved it too. They're like, oh, perfect. This can get people here.
That's so weird. Is the Zionists use Nazism to justify their genocide? But it's like you're like a mirror of them, or you like, they wanted to expel the Jewish people, so you're like, yep, okay. Yeah. People should leave. We can't assimilate into Europe. We'll just take this land from the Arab people.
No, in that same time, they were like killing British soldiers and stuff. During World War II, they were fighting Britain in Israel. And then you see him today, it's like, oh, no one came to our aid, Netanyahu saying and stuff. And it's like, oh, you were busy massacring Palestinians now.
Yep. No. Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know when we'll see an end to it, but I feel like it can't last forever the way they're going. The way they're turning the entire Arab world.
Unless they change what they're doing. They've just gone completely psycho right now. I think they're really trying to push us into to World War III, which is insane. I don't know why, but that's what it appears like they're doing. The way it's going, it can't really last. It's going to have to be a new government that's going to try to strike a deal, or because it might last for a while with the U.S. backing, but they've lost the young people, and they're not going to get them back. It's not like in 2 years they're going to be like, oh, our greatest ally. They're not going to forget what they've seen.
Right. No, exactly. And there's been this right where, like, there used to be like labor Zion, which was like, we're, Israel's socialist, Israel's progressive, Israel's this, wonderful land where Western values are protected. And then in the next 70 years, it's just shifted to Netanyahu, the psychopath, complete extremist. And he formed a coalition with people who are even more psycho than him, like Ben Gvir.
No, like it's pretty bad all along, but now they're particularly bad. It's been overall, they've done some bad stuff, but they controlled the media. But Netanyahu is even for really bad. There was one point, I can't remember his name, there was a prime minister who was trying to do some peace deals, and he was assassinated. It shows there's no problem killing Jews either.
No, absolutely not. Or Christians, even though I'm from an evangelical Christian family, and talking to some of them about, like, and I did research into that, that idea that we need to support as part of an end times prophecy as Christians, like that didn't come about till the 70s when they started pushing it.
Push this too. They were really smart. I think some bankers, again, they hired some guy to like what to write the Scofield Bible. I don't know all the details behind it, but they got that. They put like the notes with Israel as our blessed Israel, and now that Christians. Yeah, that didn't come along until what'd you say, 60s, 70s, somewhere around then.
I had someone in my church who's been to Israel who told me that in the 1967 war, God came down from heaven with a sword and helped the Israelis defeat the Arabs, and they're like, and I believed that.
Like, no, it was the U.S. military and bankers that came down.
Yeah, right.
They had all the weapons and
gave them Boeing and Raytheon weapons.
Oh, it's just so unfair, and that's it pisses me off. My money paying for that. Typically, under communism, back to this real quick, you guys typically don't try to get in random foreign wars, right?
Yes, very. Not completely isolationist, self-defense is good.
You got to have a military, of course.
Right, there's just wars, but we would pull out of Ukraine immediately, pull out of Syria, and invest all that money back at home.
Yeah, America first, which it should be. I think a lot of people agree with the America first thing, but except for the politicians. It's like everything should be put into America. I don't want nothing against, refugees and stuff coming in, but I don't want. They have free health insurance, a lot of them, and I don't. Like, how does that make sense?
Right.
It's just like, or some other guy that doesn't have much money doesn't have free health care, and they're giving it to some immigrant, and these guys are getting free hotels in New York, but yet there's guys homeless on the streets that are American citizens.
Right. Yeah, drug-addled and have no rehab other than, the rehab facilities are just to suck more money out of you, really. The Sackler family who created the opioid crisis. They're invested in rehab. Same people that we were talking about, but right.
They were they were just awful people. Yeah, they created they knew the opiate epidemic was addictive, and they lied. What did they get? A $2 billion fine, and they're worth like $100 billion or something, and they find like, $2 billion fine for killing hundreds of thousands of people a year or something. I think I've lost a couple friends to opiate ODs. I imagine it's probably pretty big. It's just
some of the most upstanding people I know too, like people from my church, and then they get an injury and they get prescribed opioids, and next thing you know, they're stealing from their family members to get by.
No, it's terrible when you see a friend get hooked because they're not themselves anymore.
No, it destroys you.
No, being a drug addiction. What under communism? How do you deal with like drug addiction? Because people obviously aren't going to be working. Is it something you go after and put them to rehab? Like.
Well, we want everyone working still, but we want more job opportunities for people and like programs to help people rehabilitate and get back on their feet. But like the military could be used to crack down on like the gangs and the drug traffic. Like Bukele in El Salvador, he took the military and cracked down on the M13 gangs, and it's way safer now.
No, he's been criticized for that, but he's done great. He went after all the gangs, cracked them up, and I saw Trump criticizing him too. Like this guy like cleaned it up. Sometimes you have to get rid of the trash. And again, I don't think a small amount of drug use is terrible, but when you see someone who's addicted, like I live in San Francisco, and the streets are just covered in junkies, people stumbling around on. I think part of the problem is both the meth and the fentanyl so cheap now. So guys are just so strung out and they're causing a problem. And you can't allow that. There has to be, I used to be like, oh, all drugs should be legal. But then I see that and I'm like, okay, there has to be I have to do something about it. They just shut down certain drugs. And if you're not functioning in society, then maybe you should be forced to rehab. Would you agree with that or no?
Yeah, I would say like rehab needs to be expanded. And then like right now it's really aimed at sucking people's money. Like
it's really expensive, I think, for like the really bad ones, and there's like rich people rehabs.
Yes, like that are just spas or luxury spas. But like, and then crack down on like the drug traffickers. Like people, there are these big criminal organizations trafficking things like heroin, and and the way that things are classified too doesn't make any sense. Like weed is classified the same way as heroin. It's like, that doesn't make sense. We need to prioritize cracking down on heroin and meth and.
No, yeah, like that's because they said I was like, oh, drugs be legal until I was actually around, meth and fentanyl and stuff. Like, wow, this destroys people.
Yeah, I saw someone smoking meth for the first time the other day. Sorry, I'm turning my phone.
Yeah, no worries. I've done that. I did that when I was first trying the podcast. Like, bing, bing, like, oh crap.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's terrible. You see, they just look like zombies.
Yeah, it's like living in San Francisco, you become like anti-homeless. And it's not because they're homeless, because the people you see, they're drug addicts. They're stealing from you. They're aggressive. They're in your face. It's just like they're everywhere in LA and San Francisco. It's like unreal if you haven't been out there. You walk around, it's like walking zombies. Right. And that can't be allowed. These people need to be arrested and forced into rehab. It's for their own good. Allowing them to die in the streets is not. And they act like the liberals are like, oh, it's for, we're letting them be free and stuff. And it's like, oh, they're killing themselves. They're destroying other people. They're robbing. They're stealing. This just tears apart the whole society. You have to look at the whole society too. I believe in individual rights, but there's also other people's rights. And I think it's a communism is about looking at the whole society, correct?
Yeah, definitely. And that's I was gonna say it's a very communist principle. Like this affects everyone when there's people who are basically zombies from heroin on the streets, and they could get violent, especially if they're going through withdrawals. And I'm not suggesting that we throw them into the U.S. prison system the way that it exists now, where recidivism is 70, 80%, but that needs to be transformed, and we need to do something to rehabilitate these people. And because right now the system just leaves them behind, and like, how are you supposed to get out of that once you don't have a house or anywhere to shower or a cell phone? Yeah,
they need to be forced to be sober, and then given like work programs and stuff.
Yeah.
Problem is they want to act like the drugs aren't the problem, and it is with these people. It has to be the drugs first.
Yeah. And
it needs to be forced. I know that some people say that's like too mean, but when these people, anyone that's been around these people, they're not good people. They become like zombies. And that's not good for them either. It's in their best interest to force these people to be sober. And sometimes it might take a while. You might have to hold them for a couple months in like some kind of like rehab center and start forcing them to work. But just allowing them to and if they're not willing to do it, then maybe you're going to go in jail. But give them a way out as soon as they're willing to work. I think most of them will be like, okay, I don't want to be in here. I'll work my way out.
Yeah, a lot of them would, I think. And meth is like turns people into the devil.
Yeah,
he'll do anything for it. But yeah, I'm in full agreement with that, and I'm not saying we bring back the Soviet gulag system, but that was the idea that like we're gonna give people jobs, set them to work, and then we'll send them back into society once they're rehabilitated and used to working every day.
Yeah, they said those are brutal, but working.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe like,
harsh
maybe like short term, like 2-3 months could be a good answer,
Yeah.
Or if someone's messed up a couple times, get sent to be forced to work like 6 months, not where they're beating them and working them to death, but maybe that would be better than regular prison.
Right, and the gulags even had minimum wage. Actually, there's been a lot of propaganda.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like in the U.S., prisoners make like 12 cents an hour. Because they wanted to be humane about it. You know, or at least give the appearance of being humane. So they gave them like minimum wage and gave them job skills, and then they eventually abolished them when there was a bunch of negative press about the gulag.
Yeah, right. When were they done away with? Towards the end of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, I think it was like the 60s or 70s, maybe after Stalin.
Yeah, I haven't done enough research, but I know supposedly they were really, really bad, and I'm sure they were at least pretty bad.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't fun.
Yeah, right. Getting stuck to a work camp, and a lot of that was people just criticizing communism and stuff. But you would allow like criticism of it just
Yeah, they had to become a military dictatorship because they were fighting the Nazis. So, like, that would not be anything I would argue for implementing. It was more out of necessity, where, like, you had all these traitors who were, like, you know, attacking the government and siding with the Nazis. So, like, at that time, they're like, we don't have time for this. We have to prepare to defeat, because every Western analyst was predicting the Soviet Union to just get rolled by Germany. Like, they thought it wasn't even going to be cool. Because, like I said, the Soviet
They were in the
Union was this
beginning until,
backwards
yeah.
country.
And like the Germans had an amazing army. I think the beginning of the war, they were smoking them, but
Yeah, and then the Soviets were able, they had to put everything into military spending, and it was basically like, you know, run like a military. If you're criticizing your officer and siding with the enemy, well, you're going to jail.
yeah, they lost. I don't know the numbers. They lost a lot of people in Russia.
27 million. Yeah.
27 million. Wow. Yeah, that was.
And they dealt 80% of the German casualties.
Yeah, because they were the ones out there fighting the front lines against the Germans because they just had so many lives to be able to take them. You know, They were getting smoked, but they just kept fighting on so many people. Brutal, brutal war.
Yeah, it was an existential threat because if Germany won, they would have seized Russia. And who knows what the world would look like today.
Right. It's hard to say. Worse, better. We have no idea to know, right? It's complex things. So what do you think's been the what would you say is the best country that's pulled off communism so far? 'Cause I know a lot of the countries have kind of gone down.
That's a good question. I would say you got to point to modern China today because like the Soviet Union collapsed and things got too bureaucratic and corrupt at the end, like especially with Khrushchev in the 60s. I'm not a fan of him. I'm more of a Stalin guy, but the like modern China, they've lifted 800 million people out of poverty. They do all these like if you look at like building projects in the U.S., there's so much red tape, there's so much regulation, and there's such a struggle to get financing from the banks. Whereas in China, if they decide to do a project, it's like, 2-3 weeks, and there's giant skyscrapers.
No, it's true. They get done so much quicker, and there is so much red tape, so much bureaucracy here. So they get stuff done. I mean, I would say Cuba's done okay, but they have major sanctions as well.
The embargo makes it so difficult.
So it's hard to judge it because of that. Yeah,
their healthcare system is still much better than ours, and I've written about how we could basically adopt Cuba and Venezuela style healthcare system. Well, Venezuela less so. Cuba's helped them out a lot. But Cuba-style healthcare here would work because we'd actually have more money to do what they did on a larger scale. But, like, the embargo is brutal. It's a tiny island country. They have very limited resources because they, it's an island. There's not things like steel and stuff like that. And then the U.S. just surrounds them with their military, doesn't let anything in or out. It's like an old-fashioned siege.
Yeah, I just don't understand why that's still going because the Cold War has ended a while ago. So why do we still have an embargo? Do you have any idea? No,
because we can't. They don't allow any kind of alternative economic system, and because all of Cuba's resources are invested in things like healthcare, infrastructure, the people, and Western. Not only do the shareholders need to rip us off here in the U.S., but they're now reliant on super exploiting other countries. So if a country says, no, we're going to kick out all the Western shareholders, that's when you see the CIA go in, the U.S. military go in, the sanctions get applied. It all has to do with what's best for Wall Street and the banking system.
Yeah, I think it would, if all of a sudden Cuba did flourish, it would look really bad.
Yeah, and that's what happened in 2017 because the Pope pressured Obama to alleviate the embargo, and Cuba had the highest GDP in Central and Latin America. They, all of a sudden, their economy started blowing up and flourishing because they were free to move. And it's amazing, I think, what they've been able to accomplish even being under that blockade. And I think it's hard for Americans to understand what that would even be like to live on an island where you're being strangled by a larger power.
Yeah, no, I would love to be able to sit down and watch, have them lifted and watch 20 years and see how they do,
Right,
It'd be good to be able to see, okay, this is what it is, this is what it's not, is this doing better, is this doing better?
Exactly, right. But then it's a propaganda thing too. They don't want a communist country to do anything well.
No, I agree. They don't want that because they want to vilify communists. And I still think there's problems with communists, but it would just be nice if we could actually see and let one go.
Right, and that's communists say that too. Like in China, they say Stalin got, and they say Stalin was the greatest leader of all time. He was the best communist, but he got 30% of stuff wrong and 70% of stuff right. And we need to learn from that and improve. So even communists are looking at past socialist projects and trying to do away with what didn't work and take what didn't. But it's so hard when they're under this imperialist blockade.
Yeah, I think one big problem with communism, though, it'll fall apart without a strong leader. So if it's not maybe if it was running, no, but without a strong leader, it seems like that's when the corruption comes in and so many problems. But I guess the same thing happens under capitalism.
Right, yeah, it's true. It's you have these cults of personality who arise with the revolution, with the actual overthrowing of the existing government. and they become heroes, but then who runs the country when they died? Like, that was a huge problem in the Soviet Union because Khrushchev took over and he was a piece of crap, like bureaucrat, and he really took things the wrong direction, whereas China had solid leaders who were able to take over after Mao, and they took the country in a very different direction than what Mao wanted to do, but
you know,
they were able to hold things together.
China is doing a lot better. You can't deny that. And well, Russia's not communist anymore, but I mean, Putin's a very strong leader. He goes, I've seen videos of like the oligarchs screwing people over, and he goes and lectures them, makes them like just choose them out, makes them change things right there, makes them sign a document right in front of them. Like, wow, this guy is like a strong leader. He's like, no, sign this right now. And the guy is just like started back talking for a second, and he's like, no, and the guy like signs it.
And imagine that in the U.S. Imagine Kamala Harris going up to a Wall Street shareholder and saying, "You're going to do this."
George Soros starts chewing out George Soros. It would be the opposite. He'd be chewing her out.
Exactly, right.
Or Larry Fink of BlackRock. You guys are not doing this anymore. It would never happen.
No, they're just the biggest puppets here. So,
That's, you know, personally, I know it's not supposed to like Putin, but I think he's a pretty good leader overall.
I do too. Yeah, and I mean, he's not in the party that I support in Russia. You know, like I support the communists, who are the second largest party, but they voted for Putin this year because they said we're in wartime. Putin's a solid leader. He's, you know, cracking down on the oligarchs. We should support him. And I agree.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying he's perfect, but
Yeah, overall, but he holds the country together. It's like you can't rule all countries the same. Well,
right.
I mean, sometimes you need a strong rule. I mean, I guess it'd be nice for America to have a strong leader too.
Right. I mean, imagine how great it would be if someone cracked down on. That's why people liked to vote Trump in 2016. They're like, oh, finally someone who's going to tell the oligarchs how it is.
But he's not running the same campaign anymore.
No, it's very different.
Maybe he'll surprise me and get in and go after these people, but I'm very skeptical.
Yeah, me too. He needs to actually drain the swamp.
Yeah. Right. Drain the swamp. But he filled it with the swamp.
With Bolton and Pompeo and all these.
No, exactly. Like they put the worst possible people in.
Yep, from the Bush administration, who he had been railing against on the campaign.
Yeah, it was a disappointment, you know, and it's, you know, sure, I still like Trump, but he's just disappointed me. Yeah. And then closing the country down, pushing the vaccine.
Right, yeah.
No.
He kind of bragged about that, too.
Yeah, have you ever been to Russia or no?
No, not yet. Not yet. Jackson's there, right?
Yeah, no, I want to go visit him out there. We hung out in Miami. He told me to come out. I'm like, I need to do that. So
nice.
I want to go because I've traveled all over the world, never been to Russia. It'd be cool to go see that.
Yeah, Haz Eldin, chairman of our party, was just out there, and they took him to the Donbass, which is the part in eastern Ukraine with mostly Russian speakers who have been fighting the war. And said it was very interesting talking to people and them telling him how the Ukrainian government was bombing their homes for years, how the country was overrun by like these neo-Nazis with swastikas who would come in and kill them for being Russian, and the Russian government came in and put a stop to it.
Yeah, it's not. Most American people think Russia just kind of randomly invaded Ukraine. They don't know in 2014 the CIA and George Soros did a coup on their government because the guy was pro-Russia. They put in, this, pro-America, and now that was Zelensky. And then they wanted to put NATO there, which would be putting missiles on their border, which we wouldn't allow that in Mexico. And on top of this, there was civil war with where you said that there, and a couple other places where they were bombing people. These people want to be part of Russia, not Ukraine. So they looked at themselves as Russians, not Ukrainian. So it's not like Putin was just invading, trying to take over Ukraine. He was trying to take land back of people that want to be part of Russia.
Yes. And people have this, it's insane how disconnected from reality Americans are. Even some who are like people who I generally respect, they think Putin's just this madman. It's like you can hate the guy all you want, but he's very rational. Very measured.
He's extremely calculated and smart and intelligent.
Right.
People will probably be mad that we're talking good things about him in this podcast. Right. They'll take that and like, these Putin puppets. But he has bad things too. But overall, seems like he's a good leader for Russia.
Yeah, and everything he does is calculated. He would never invade another country just because he, felt like it.
No, I was a little surprised when he invaded. I'm like, that's a big challenge. But exactly, he definitely calculated, and he's winning the war.
Yep.
He's gonna win that war.
Yep.
He can't lose it.
Surely.
He's overcalculated. He had some big losses from it, but he's he can't lose it.
Yeah, it's interesting how the U.S. too has said that Ukraine was going to win, over and over and over, and now they're forced to admit
it's not looking too good. I mean, Trump's already saying he's gonna pull out, which is good, but if not, Kamala might keep it going for a couple more years. But they don't have any soldiers left to fight.
No, and that's what's so disgusting is a whole generation of Ukrainians is being killed, and these people act like they're pro-Ukraine. Like, you're the ones destroying Ukraine, cheering on the destruction.
No, like all the deaths, exactly. We just destroyed the country so we could launder a bunch of money to sell weapons. Nothing good was done. Russia's still going to win. The war was completely pointless.
Did you see that Atlantic Council article, too, that they're basically just a thing, like a mouthpiece for the military-industrial complex and Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. But they said, Zelensky wants to turn Ukraine into a big Israel. Here's a roadmap.
Jesus.
That was their goal, is to turn it into another Israel.
Yeah, no, I thought that too. I'm like, why are we so adamant on it? Is it something to do with that? And yeah, probably. Because our
Right.
politicians are just, the Democrats are so gung-ho, Ukraine, the Republicans are so gung-ho, war for Israel. But either party, we get war.
Right. The other thing they don't like is that countries like Iran, Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba are all forming closer ties with each other and trying to overcome the U.S.-dominated financial system that was created with the formation of the IMF and World Bank, after World War II, when the U.S. was the only country that didn't get bombed to smithereens, so we emerged as the world superpower. And now these countries are allying with each other and building alternative trade networks and trading with these countries who have been sanctioned by the U.S., and NATO and the U.S. are desperate to stop it. They see China and Russia as the catalyst.
That's a major problem for America. And it's like, but I don't blame the people for doing that. We forced them, I think it's BRICS, right? They push this organization together, and it's like, now it's Iran, China, Russia, I think North Korea, all these big, powerful they're alliancing together. What, probably Venezuela? I'm not sure for sure. I would guess they're probably
they just
involved.
applied to join. Yeah, so did Cuba.
So it's going to be a big problem for America. We're going to stop controlling the financial situation, and that's controlling the world. You got to control the finances.
Right. Yes. Yeah, especially in the world today. And I wish we should join BRICS. Why not trade with these countries?
Yeah, I would rather be working with these countries than stuff.
Right. Exactly. We're working with the worst countries. So.
Yeah, before we wrap up, let's go. You're from Iowa, right? You wrestled at Iowa. Growing up, Iowa was like the people we looked up to, like the Iowa wrestling, the Dan Gable, Is wrestling like super big out there or no?
Yeah, it's pretty big. Definitely bigger than down south. Yeah, I wrestled at like a D3 college, but like we would have a lot of people in the gym to watch us. Like Dan Gable, everybody knows Gable.
Would Gable come in? Is this one? You're here in his area?
Yeah, I've met him a handful of times.
He's a legend. That's the guy, like, the greatest, probably one of the greatest wrestlers of all time and greatest coach of all time.
Right, yeah. I have even written articles about how Marxism has helped me with wrestling. How the materialist worldview has helped me understand wrestling better. But it's it's a big deal. It's a big part of my life, and it's part of why I like your show too. Even if we're not 100% ideologically in line, you're a critical thinker and you come from the same kind of background as me. So I just like watching you.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, a communist, but you're a wrestler, so we have a lot in common. I think everyone, parents should get especially sons, should get them wrestling or doing some kind of martial art. It just makes you a better person in every aspect of life. It just makes you so much tougher to deal with things, so much better.
Yeah, especially nowadays, like it's a great way to build character with your kids.
Yeah, because they're not really being pushed anymore.
No, exactly.
It's one of the last places where they still push them.
Yep.
Some wrestling is pulling back a little bit from what it was. It was pretty hardcore when I was a kid, getting yelled at and stuff. But it's good to teach those kids that toughness. Yeah. Especially boys, There's a lot more girls wrestling now too, but.
Yeah, I have a ton of girls who come to my club.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's changed so much. Yeah. So, what age kids do you usually coach?
High school and youth. So,
okay.
Big age range, but I love it.
No, it's so great to give back to. I've coached a little bit with, in high schools and stuff before, and I really enjoyed it because the kids love it. Giving back, it's so much fun.
Right. Yeah. I just want to help give them that discipline and some tools to go into the crazy world.
Such a big part of their life, especially at that young age. They focus. It makes them. I think wrestlers, most people, makes them better people.
Definitely.
I don't think it makes anyone a worse person.
No, there are definitely some bad people who are wrestlers.
Yeah, but they're bad people anyways. Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
There's a lot of crazy wrestlers, but
for sure.
Do you get any pushback from the parents because of the communism stuff, or not really?
I haven't yet. I have one dad who makes jokes about it, but they don't really care.
Yeah, like you said, if you treat the kids good, you become a good member of society. That's the most important part.
Exactly. That's all Americans care about. They're not as anti-communist as like people think they are. Like I very rarely tell someone I'm a communist and have like a meltdown. Like, oh, okay, what's that all about?
Yeah, we should be able to have different ideologies. It's it's not worse than being part of the Democratic Party today.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, like it's not worse than supporting genocide.
No, exactly, and that's why I'm skip election. I just can't back genocide. And Republicans just full on gone, full genocide mode.
Yep. And
I was definitely leaning Republican before, this war, but then they go, I thought they were anti-war, free speech. That's what they were running on. That changed real quick.
Yeah, it's like genocide.
Anti-Semitism, hate speech laws, they want to say.
Right.
And that's really just criticizing Israel.
Yeah, you have genocide A party, the Republicans, and then genocide wrapped in an LGBTQ flag, the Democrats.
Yeah, have you seen like the memes? It's like the bombs of like the Republican bombs, regular jet, and then it's like a jet bombing with like BLM and like trans flags and stuff. It's the same either way. There's very little difference in the parties. There's just a couple little things they fight over.
Right, and those issues are usually minor, and they understand that those issues are political footballs that they can kick back and forth and use to get people in the voting booth. It's just like, wake the hell up.
Yeah, it's like how far you're going to allow abortion. Because both parties are going to allow it. It's just to win. There's a couple of little things, but there's not very big differences. Maybe a 1 or 2% tax rate. Corporations will get bigger tax rates either way.
Right, exactly.
But we're going to pay either 37 or 38% of the high-end taxes. Just like little tiny things is fighting over.
Yeah, they disagree on every culture war issue, but then if you look at foreign policy or even economics,
corporate bailouts, bailing out banks, pushing pharmaceuticals.
Yep. I mean, Obama promised to be this left-wing progressive who was going to redistribute wealth, and he bailed out the big banks after they crashed the economy.
And was it Obama that bailed out the banks?
Yeah, in 2008 or 2009 maybe, bailed them out. 2008 they crashed, but and now they're doing the same exact thing that they were. So we'll see another crash.
Yeah, if they crash, they know they'll get bailed out if they crash them. So if
yeah,
we crash something, we lose it. If we're buying like a bunch of houses and we crash it, we lose those houses. But the bank does that, like, oh, we'll give you the money out. You're too big.
Right.
But we're not too big. I could have 10 houses I'm trying to buy, but I over leverage like an idiot, and I fucked up, so I lose my 10 houses. As I should. But the bank doesn't make the same mistake and like, oh, we'll bail you out.
Right, and that's the thing. Like, our system is so centralized and run from the top down or run by the government. It's basically like we're living in socialism already. It's just socialism for the richest, most exploitative, corrupt people in the country.
Yeah,
they plan the economy centrally.
It's hard. It's hard to argue with that. Even you look at like the bailouts during COVID, almost all went to the big businesses that didn't need it. But a lot of my friends with small businesses lost their businesses.
Yes, right. Which is centralization. Which is, Marx would argue that's how capitalism tends to work. It centralizes power at the top until something is done through the working class fighting for change.
Yeah, I just worry with the communism though. A lot of times the people at the very top take everything. Where they can control everything. That's the opposite downside to it.
Like, could you give me an example?
Like, I don't know the governments a lot, but suppose we didn't like Stalin. Wasn't most people poor, and he would like have everything, and like Mao. I haven't studied the governments enough to be sure, but
Stalin was pretty good actually. He lived in like an apartment with the other politicians.
Okay, maybe not him then. I know a lot of the party members would be taking bribes and stuff then. Like high up party members would be getting bribes and stuff.
There were some like. You could point to some examples like Sukarno in Indonesia. He was like a communist leader who was notorious for like sleeping with prostitutes.
Yeah.
And like that's stuff that needs to be.
I think if corruption is done and it's just like that, you'd have to just be like death penalty or something. If everyone's like taking bribes.
Right, yeah.
It'd have to just be extreme measures so it wouldn't be done. Because otherwise people are just, taking bribes and.
That's kind of how the party in China's gotten. Like they're very harsh on themselves. Like if they understand that they can't go back to what it used to be where there was all this corruption. Like, people's trust in the party in China before the anti-corruption efforts was sinking below 50%, and now it's up at 90%.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty popular now, the government.
So hard. Yeah, people really liked the
What year did they do this?
I believe it was 2008 when Xi Jinping launched those. He launched anti-poverty alleviation efforts combined with anti-corruption efforts. So basically, we're going to root what you're talking about, that corruption, out of the party and try and get them more connected with the people.
Yeah, I need to go back and look at the history of China and Russia a little better. These things are complicated. You have deep dives and you get different perspectives. So it takes so much time. It sounds like you've done a lot of time in the reading on them. So it's because you got to read multiple books. You can't just read one book and trust it.
Right. No, you got to read both perspectives.
And then the truth's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Always.
So, yeah, anything you want to add in communism or anything before we wrap up?
I don't think so. It was a pleasure to do this. I've been a big fan forever.
Oh, thank you.
You ever played the EA MMA video game?
A few times. When I'm in, I've seen that. when I first saw this video game, I'm like, oh, that's cool. So people can find you on Twitter. What's your handle?
At EdB Liger Smith.
Okay, and then you're on TikTok too?
Yep.
Until you're banned again?
Yeah, I got an account warning right now. See how long it lasts. But Midwestern Marks, and then I have Midwestern Marks on Twitter too as my organization. And then the ACP, the American Communist Party.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. And subscribe to the channel. I forget telling people to do that. Have a good one.